Welcome, everybody. It's the Ricochet Podcast, number 521. I'm James Lalix in frigid, frosty, clear, blue sky, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Rob logs in New York. And Peter Robinson is off on a sweater tying seminar, so he's not with us today. But in his stead, of course, happy to take over, angling for that permanent position that edges Peter out into the tundra, is John Yu. John, welcome. You're in California as well, in crazy Berkeley. How are
I'm
things
so
there?
happy to be here. You know, I love getting promoted to the big show from the the minor leagues.
Yeah.
Right.
So I have a question for you, John. Are you preparing a SCOTUS brief? Are you preparing? Is anyone preparing a SCOTUS brief?
Oh yeah.
Say SCOTUS one more time.
Oh yeah, Rudy's out there, in Pennsylvania on the ground at the Four Seasons landscape. But no, there's some serious people, actually very serious people working on appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court.
What appealing? What
about what? Yeah.
The Pennsylvania legislature set the election date to November 3rd, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court switched it to November 6th. So at least to set aside those 3 days of ballots that came in late. But I don't think it's enough to make up the difference in Pennsylvania. I mean, we're talking maybe 10 to 15,000 ballots. That would be
Pennsylvania's situation doesn't seem to be much of a brainer. It seems obvious that they usurped their authority, and you would hope that the Supreme Court would come down with a crushing majority in order to legitimize their decision. How could liberal judges look at that and say, no, I think the courts in Pennsylvania had the absolute right to override the legitimate decision of the legislature? I mean, what would be the liberal argument in favor of that?
I give you a lot of them. Unfortunately, I swim amongst the sea.
Seriously, I'm curious. Aside from your living, breathing, Playtex elastic Constitution, what?
So they would say that when the state legislatures have the power to pick the electors, set the time, date, and manner of elections, that then turns it into a state constitutional question. So then each state, under its own constitution, gets to sort of rearrange all the building blocks. So, for example, the Supreme Court, for example, has upheld all these redistricting commissions, right? Arizona has one, California has one, Virginia has one now. The Constitution actually says the state legislature draws the congressional districts every 10 years after the census, but a lot of states by initiative have moved that over to these boards of retired judges. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court has said that's still the state legislative power. I think that's total baloney. And it was 5-4, and it was Justice Ginsburg wrote that opinion. And actually, the great thing is John Roberts wrote the dissent, and he said that makes no sense at all. He says, actually, John Roberts said when it says state legislature, it means only the state legislature. So actually, I agree with you, James. If this issue gets to the Supreme Court, I could see Roberts and it would be like a 6-3 win for conservatives. I can't even see it getting close.
Yeah. I mean, isn't this a classic conservative liberal distinction? I mean, conservatives in general think that whenever possible, it should always be deferred to the elected representatives. And in this case, it's the state. And they elected the elected representatives, and they said it's going to be November 11th. It doesn't make that much difference. And the judges can't say it's not that date. Whereas liberals say, well, judges... They're like kind of like the ultimate. So we have, and liberal judges are always finding new ways, new rules. So it seems to me that the crack in this, and we're focusing on this particular case in Pennsylvania. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's the only one that's non-BS, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the only one that's and it's the only one that can swing tens of thousands of votes.
But even that, I guess the
principle,
principle of it is actually serious, and probably
it doesn't actually depend on having spies inside the counting center. It's just a clean question of
you don't have to right. So
there's something else, Rob. There, it's not just that the liberals believe judges, they have wisdom. There's the idea of count every vote, that it's disenfranchising and probably disproportionately and adversely impacting. If you don't, what's the matter with you conservatives that you do? I thought you believed in the system. Don't you want to count every vote? And the Republicans say, yeah, if it's a legal vote by a certain date, that's not that hard. Those are the rules.
But isn't that going to be ultimate? I mean, John, you should tell us. Isn't that going to be ultimately the question the judges have to decide? Is even if you say, well, look. so state Supreme Court judge can't extend the dates. You still err on the side of those people who cast those votes, cast them in good faith. They were following a process that they were told was going to be legal. They expected to be casting a legal vote, a legal one, not an illegal one, a legal vote. You can't now disenfranchise them retroactively. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah. Rob's proving once again that he saved $100,000 by not going to law school.
Because anyone can do it.
Somehow absorbed
anyone
all the
can do it. That's
absorbed the ideas. No, but that's exactly right. The second argument on the left, and this is the same argument they made during Bush versus Gore 20 years ago. This is the same argument, James, they make at every election from dog catcher all the way to president is, what matters is someone voted and we count their vote. We want the intent of the voters to matter. Even if they don't comply with all the little rules about signing the envelopes and getting the witnesses, that's all just voter suppression. Right? That's all designed to reduce the number of people who can vote. And it's linked into historic efforts in the South to stop people from voting.
What I'm saying is,
it's just a fancier way to do it. This is just voter ID. There's one last issue the Supreme Court resolved. It's crazy. You would think people would fight about showing your driver's license to vote, right? Just so voter ID. But you see those people on the left consistently say they took it all to the Supreme Court, they lost, that even requiring an ID to vote is a form of voter suppression of a kind with the Jim Crow South.
Right. So is it possible this could go to the Supreme Court and it could be upheld? I mean, the move could be upheld 9-0, or it could be upheld you could conceivably win the issue, but in the actual decision be that those votes should still be counted. I mean, it seems to me that's the most likely, right? I mean, not the most likely, but probably the most, I don't know what the word would be. Seems to be the most clear answer to me is that.
Well, actually, so with John Roberts and then Rob's classmate and buddy Brett Kavanaugh, because he also does not want to be handing off the presidency to anybody, is that the votes don't matter at all, but they make the decision. It's clear for the next elections. They should have decided this before November 3rd. They had the opportunity.
That's the great thing.
Wanted them to, and they wouldn't do it.
Everybody's learned their lesson, of course, from this. The media did a very bad job of this election. The polling was awful, and the voting was awful. So by 2024, I think we're going to pretty much have it nailed down then, where the media is right down the middle. The polling is absolutely accurate, and voting nationwide is a perfect thing. People are saying, well, this happened before with Bush v. Gore. Max Stier, the founding partner and the CEO of the nonpartisan, they say, Partnership for Public Service, who
you might recall was a player in the Brett Kavanaugh story.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Remember him? He's the one who allegedly, Rob's the expert on all this since he was there. He was an eyewitness. I think he was deposed by the FBI about this.
He doesn't think
that refuse that.
Stier doesn't think the current situation is analogous to Bush v. Gore, which dragged on for an awful long time, 27 days, et cetera, et cetera. John, do you think that's the case? Do you think, or is it needless to even say that it has to be analogous? It's just a different situation.
I think it's analogous. It's just funny that the positions are reversed. Now Trump is in the position of Gore and Biden's in the position of Bush, because remember, Bush versus Gore, the first count, the recounts, the official count from remember the Secretary of State, that woman with the big, general epaulette kind of outfit on, with all the makeup, who was crying on air. She certified the vote for Bush. And remember, Gore was in the position of saying, no, we got to keep it going. We got to keep counting. We got to reopen everything, which is essentially the argument Trump is making. Biden's the one who's saying, I'm going to be certified. Once they certify the vote, I win, and it's just no way to overcome it. But the reason it's different, although I don't think it's what Stier is talking about, the reason it's different is this shows why I think it's really hard to hack into the American electoral system, because this is not one state with a 500 vote difference, right? This is Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania. To have corrupted the election means you'd have to, get many of these states to count all the votes for Biden or overcount votes for Biden. And many of these states are Republican. Right. That's the difference, I think, versus Bush versus Gore.
Well, I mean, as far as having to coordinate it, Rob will tell you, right, that Dominion is responsible for this. The Dominion, which was the original name was the Soros Vote Adjustment Algorithm System, but they said, that's a little too on the nose. And they changed it to Dominion, which makes nobody suspicious at all. And then with just a few little manipulations of the code and twirling the dials, they shifted the votes. Right, Rob? I mean, that's what you believe.
Well, that is. I mean, if you just switch the words around, that's exactly what people said in 2004 about on the other side, on the Kerry side, the Democrats in 2004. I know because I was living among them. Were devastated by the loss in 2004. They could not understand it. It didn't compute to them. And I actually, a few of people actually reached out to me the next morning and said, can we have lunch? I need you to explain to me why the country hasn't falling apart in 2004. And they had all sorts of plans, the computers and Diebold, and they was connected to Halliburton, and it was all going to, smart people believe these crazy things because they couldn't accept that George W. Bush had been reelected, even though it seemed like not that hard to expect. I mean, it wasn't an outcome they wanted, but it didn't seem like an outcome that was outside the realm of possibility. It wasn't even unlikely. It seemed to be the likely outcome, all inputs understood. And that's kind of where we are now. We're sort of the fat girl at the inaugural screaming, no, the minute Donald Trump took office. That's kind of where I think the Trump supporters are, where they're just kind of like, replaying the hits of yesteryear from 2004. And frankly, I think in some cases, 2008 and the other disappointing for some election, and kind of hoping that it all isn't true. And I hope that's over by the time that's over in time for the conservatives in America to do, get some work done.
Just one thing about this computer system thing, because I've been getting so many emails. I don't know about you guys, but
yeah,
I'm getting flooded by rumors of this. I saw that. The only one that seemed serious enough to cause a systematic vote fraud would be hacking into the vote counting systems themselves. But on this one, I would say that doesn't depend on, crazy people filing hundreds of lawsuits. The Justice Department, that's what they're there for. That's actually the kind of thing the Justice Department can investigate. It would be someone hacked, and that's a federal crime.
Right. But okay,
let me hacked into a computer system and changed the vote tabulations, and they're good at this. I mean, they're good at computer crime.
Okay, but as a former DOJ deep state attorney, deep in the swamp.
Oh, I was so in the deep state. You have no idea.
I know. I won't believe me.
Years to climb to get back to the surface.
As someone who was tainted by that,
embrace it. I love it.
Okay.
How do you, Mr. State? Mr. State, please. Mr.
How do
State.
you, Mr. Deep? I think.
Yeah, my friends just call me Deep.
How do you but how do you address those concerns? If we believe the Department of Justice is essentially a deep state cabal operating on an anti-Trump bias, which isn't 100% insane, by the way. I mean, I think we know from following the Russia story that, that the problem for the left is that a whole lot of things that Donald Trump said were happening to him were in fact happening to him. How do you explain? How do you then rely on the DOJ to actually investigate this if we have no confidence in the Department of Justice and no confidence in the FBI and no confidence in state election officials and elected state election officials and Republican elected state election officials? How do we get past this?
So just as the DOJ part, if you go back and think about the Russia collusion investigation, and I always want to say it was not the ground level agents out in the field who are hardworking, patriotic, generally conservative people. They vote a majority for Trump. If the terrible distortion of the Russia collusion investigation, that was the people at the headquarters, Comey, his headquarters, at the very top people who were twisting, I think, the powers of government after Trump. I think the people, now that's been corrected. Right now you have, Bill Barr in charge of the Justice Department. I mean, this is not a guy who's going to put his thumb on the scales against Trump. And so I think that those ground level agents, the people out in the field offices, if they sniff anything funny about the computer systems, they're going to pursue it, like bloodhounds. I have no doubt about it. They're not deep state people who want Biden to win at all. And I think that's the difference between the, but the bigger question, you're right, Rob, is politically and culturally, I think actually it's been the left that for 20, and this is the other thing that's weird about Trump is more like acting like the Gore and the left here, is that it's been liberals ever since Bush versus Gore who've raised doubts about the election. Like you said, Rob, in 2004,
even before
they claimed the diebold election machines were broken. In 2000, they claimed that funny ballot caused everyone to vote for Ralph Nader. Little old Jewish grandmas in Boca Raton are voting for Ralph Nader instead of Gore, right? So it's actually been liberals who, for the last 20 years, have been attacking the integrity of the elections. So now it's almost like a bipartisan cultural phenomenon that everyone questions.
Right.
The integrity of
they set the table. Now we're all eating. So because that's ultimately what I was trying to get at, which is that if you wanted to hear conspiracy theories, right? If you wanted to hear, for me, in my lifetime, if I wanted to hear conspiracy theories about corporations controlling things and about big Unix servers spying on me and about my vote not counting, all I need
servers. I'm sorry, Unix servers.
You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
He keeps saying may instead of just declarative statements.
Servers.
All I needed to do was to go to college. Right? Or for that matter, read the national press. If I want to get into like weird right-wing conspiracies, I got to kind of go to Reddit, or I got to really search them out. And now it seems like, certainly on Fox News at nighttime, there's a whole bunch of nonsense being served up that seems to me a lot like the nonsense that I learned in college. And the general liberal media is having a freak out about this. And I despair. They will not connect the dots, but at least privately, I can nod and say, "Oh, some of these songs sound familiar. I think I heard them from my political science graduate student teaching assistant at Yale in 1984."
Oh God, that guy's probably teaching in primary school in Manhattan somewhere right now.
Or he is your dean.
That's true too. He could be the president of the university for all
at this point.
Well, it's nothing new. In 1874 election, I'm sure that somebody was accusing somebody else of getting up into the telegraph lines and splicing them out and dashing for other candidates for the election results. Whatever technology comes along that they use, somebody's going to accuse some nefarious force of using it. I'm still just hung up in my head like two comments back from Rob where he was discussing, I think, the overweight woman at the inaugural.
Remember that?
I do whatsoever, but it's the body shaming there, Rob, that I find really uncharitable of you, and that's odd because I know that you're a charitable guy, and a lot of people have a charitable urge themselves. But the problem is, how do they simplify it? How do they know where to give something to? Well, I'm more than happy to tell you that today we're sponsored by Donors Trust, which is what? It is a principled and tax-friendly way to simplify your charitable giving. Imagine a guy named, let's call him Paul. Maybe you're a bit like Paul yourself. Paul is an investor who likes to get things done, both in business and in philanthropy. He wants to put his charitable giving to work, solving society's problems and fighting important fights now when he's dead. So he sought out the most tax-efficient and simple way to make sure that his giving would be as effective as possible. Paul found Donors Trust. So can you. At Donors Trust, he opened a donor-advised fund. What's that? Well, it's a fund that acts like a charitable savings account that lets him give in a smart, tax-advantaged, and private way. Now, he spends less time on administration and more time having an impact. But Donors Trust is more than an administrative tool for Paul. It can be more than that for you. With its unique mission, he sees it as a critical cog in advancing freedom. Because Donors Trust works with a wide range of donors who share a commitment to the freedoms and the principles that strengthen America. Donors Trust philanthropic advisors can help you sharpen your giving, discover new groups, and define your charitable legacy. So join the community of liberty-minded donors at Donors Trust. To see how a donors advised fund could benefit your giving, as well as Paul's, yours, go to donorstrust.org/ricochet for their 6 reasons to use a donor-advised fund. That's donorstrust.org/ricochet. And as ever, we thank Donors Trust for sponsoring the Ricochet podcast. Now we bring back to the podcast Ovik Roy, president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity in Austin, Texas. And I assume, Ovik, that's equal opportunity everywhere, not just Austin, Texas. It's one of the foremost healthcare wonks in the country. He is, and the host of two podcasts right here in the Ricochet Audio Network, American Wonk and COVID in 19, the latter of which covers all the news on COVID twice a week for 19 minutes. welcome to the podcast. And the people who are listening to this won't see this, but you have an extensive set of acoustical baffles behind you, which indicate that you are really stepping into this role of explaining to the rest of America what's going on. Never mind the wonkery. Let's talk about COVID. I'm here in Minnesota, where apparently we're in the eye of the hurricane, a world of hurt, lots of things happening. We've been wearing masks for an awful long time. They're blaming the yahoos and the toothless rubes and the outstates and the kids who go gallivanting in the bars. But is this seasonal and inevitable and was going to happen? Is this the last big punch before COVID finally shambles away?
Well, the right answer, James, is we don't know. We don't know if.
Thank you very much, Ovik Roy. He's been with us. That's what I feel like all these conversations come down to at the end. We don't know, and then we continue on the talks. But we don't know. But what's the best science telling us?
Well, let's be clear. I mean, a big part of the problem with COVID in general, COVID policy, has been the relentless declarations of certainty by people who claim to be experts on things they actually don't know anything about. So saying we don't know is an affirmation of the scientific method and of the real state of knowledge. So it is important to say we don't know when we in fact don't know. Having said that, there are some plausible hypotheses as to what's going on. The first is that colder weather could lead to an increase in cases, because when we have drier throats, that's generally when we're more susceptible to viral infections. Another reason why cold weather can drive infections is because, particularly in the pleasant northern climes like yours, James, excuse me.
Sounds like you're the one who's getting the dry throat.
Who knows? I just had lunch, so that's okay. Lunch rather than COVID, I promise you. But yeah, in parts of, I know that the Minnesotans are hardy, Scandi, Nordic stock people, but even the hardy Nordics of Minnesota like to be indoors when it's cold outside. And so that can lead to increased transmission, right? Because we know that COVID, SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, is more easily transmitted indoors rather than outdoors. So those are some of the hypotheses we could have about accelerated cases in cold weather parts of the country. Having said that, I haven't dug into the geographic data to be able to declare that that's true. We're seeing a rise in cases all over the country, even in the places like Austin, where I had dinner outdoors yesterday very comfortably because it was 70 degrees. So I don't know if that's driving things. It could also be that there's lockdown fatigue, right? That there are people out there who are just tired of being cooped up and they finally had it and they want to party with their friends, especially now that democracy has been saved or something like that. Lots of people are celebrating the restoration of democracy. So maybe that's driving transmission. We don't know.
Is it the same virus, Ovik? Is it the same? Is it? There's been talk about how, well, it's different now. It's been 9 months, 10 months. It might be a different virus. Is it as deadly? Is it as dangerous? Are we replaying March and April, or are we in a new phase? I'm clutching desperately at straws so you can give us some good news.
Well, there are variant strains of coronaviruses in general. Coronaviruses, just because of their genetic structure, mutate all the time. Most mutations end up leading to a much less virulent form of the virus. So mutations aren't usually good, unlike in the movies where mutations always make things more dangerous. It's not like that in the real world.
That's how Rob got to where he was.
Exactly right.
Mutations.
I failed up. I failed down. Right.
So we don't know. Again, the answer is we don't know. The one thing, actually, I will say that sort of plays against the mutation type theses as being really important is that if this Pfizer vaccine is as effective as the reported data, that would suggest that there's enough genetic stability in the virus that you can generate an immunity to it, which is encouraging. But I would say, and the other thing that's encouraging is that while the cases have risen, and that's been a big driver of the news, we have not seen the same level of rise in deaths yet. Now, deaths can be a lagging indicator, but the point I'm trying to make is that, A, we're getting better at treating COVID-19 when someone gets hospitalized with a serious COVID illness. And also, the people who are getting infected now are generally younger, and people who are generally younger are not dying in nearly the frequency that older people are. So overall, we should be less alarmed about this wave than we were about the first wave. But it's still something to be concerned about, and we should wear masks, wash your hands, deploy distancing, all those things that unfortunately are more controversial than they should be.
So just go through the controversies. We all understand washing your hands, right? Actually, you should. I have friends who wash their hands constantly and have been rolling their eyes as we've all been saying things like, "We really need to wash our hands more," and they're like, "We wash our hands all the time." So washing your hands, germaphobes. Turns out the germaphobes are
germaphobes, yeah.
Nuts, right? But it turns out they were correct. Masks.
Germaphobes and introverts are the winners in 2020.
That's right.
Paranoids are always right once in a while.
Right. Masks are effective or not effective?
Yeah, they are effective, and I know there is a band of hardy contrarians on this topic who cite various statistical analyses to make the argument. Scott's definitely one of them, to say that masks don't work using certain kinds of social sciencey analyses. Here's the way I would put it. If you look at hospitals, if you look at dental clinics, if you look at airplanes, places where in theory the transmission should be quite high, they're not. And the big correlator is the adoption of masks. So again, like, that doesn't mean you need to wear a mask when you're out playing soccer or when you're taking a walk on the street. But when you're in a crowded indoor setting, especially when you're encountering people for a prolonged period of time, and you're an adult, meaning you're not like a toddler, because toddlers aren't infectious, masks do reduce the risk. There's a fair amount of evidence at this point, and I know that there's, again, this countervailing theory, and people just, I have to say it, and if you've listened to COVID-19, our podcast on Ricochet, you've heard me say this. It's just to be really puzzling how passionate some people are in the anti-mask community. I remember a couple weeks ago, I tweeted something like, "Guys, please wear masks. Just please." And I think I lost like 300 followers that day. Like, there were so many people just mad at me. Like, I don't want to hear from Novik anymore.
So I know go ahead. Sorry.
Mask related. I mean, a guy that I follow on Twitter is Ian Miller, and I don't know what his stats are. I know that masks are his thing. And while I wear one constantly, all the time, I'm always intrigued by these charts, endless number of charts that he's able to show where mask mandates were instituted, and then still things took off. Instance after instance, country after country after country. So it doesn't affect my behavior, but it makes me think that there's some other element at work here. Now, could you say that things would be worse if there weren't masks? It's entirely possible. But so it's maybe people are skeptical of not of masks, but of the mandate itself, that they regard that as an overreach. And if we're to have a national mandate, a national mask mandate, what exactly are the legislative constitutional prerequisites that falls under?
Well, I mean, you don't need me when you have John Yoo on the podcast to talk about the federal police powers.
You mean the substance? I'm just a sub today. Just call me the sub. Or I think my other name tonight is Mr. Deep State. So I'll go by Mr.
I was going to say, like, the thing I really want to talk about with you, John, is the Korean takeover of Southern California. That's a good topic.
It's a little bit more interesting.
I know. We just got to run more Korean women all across the country.
Really? I mean, it's going to do a lot for the Republic, I think, to have more Korean women in charge, at least based on the ones I know.
At least the food will be better, even though the interior decorating will be
worse. Yeah.
Well, I mean, kimchi for breakfast, kimchi for lunch.
I'm sorry, John, did you want to finish? Did you?
It's
just really more of a pro-Korean.
I have a social sciencey question. I love how AVIC just put down the entire economics profession there. So if you're
the dismal
right
science.
If you're right and I think you're right, if you're right that the mortality rate is going down, then that mean that the trade-off for lockdowns doesn't make sense anymore? Because if less people are going to die, then you don't need to have the draconian lockdowns that everybody is suggesting we need to go to in the winter. And in fact, then you've got to take into account all these other people who are dying. Right? I think they're losing life years because they're not getting surgeries. They're not going to the gym. Yeah. They're eating badly at home. They're probably smoking indoors. There's high rates of violence at home. People aren't going to. There's a huge
job loss.
Job loss, education losses. You've got this huge cost that people aren't measuring clearly in the public that are the result of lockdowns. And we're not saving as many lives as we were, say, in April.
Well, so let me answer your question and James's question sort of together. So first, James said, well, there are these charts that show mask mandate is here and the cases kept going up. As we all know, there are a lot of factors that can drive the cases going up, right? The mask mandate is just one of many factors. If there's a massive transmission because of a super spreader event, or if there's just people aren't distancing, or there's a mask mandate that people aren't following, right? There could be a lot of reasons why a mask mandate doesn't yield the policy results that you want. But there's clearly a lot of evidence at the micro level that in places or in occupational settings where masks are widely used, the transmission rate is very low. Just to give, again, the example of airplanes, flight attendants in airplanes have a lower rate of transmission and infection from COVID than other workers who, like grocery store clerks and things like that. So now airplanes have certain other advantages. They have the UV filters and the air circulators and things like that. But it just goes to show that in that very enclosed setting where you're in a tube for 3 hours, the transmission isn't happening. So and there are many other examples I could give. I don't want to bore people with a long discussion of this, but that micro evidence is pretty compelling. And to your point, John, about the lockdowns, this is a big part of why I think masks are important, right? If we don't want to strengthen the case for lockdowns, then it's especially important that we do the easy voluntary things like hand washing and mask wearing to keep the virus at bay. This is why, for example, in Germany, while Germany has had a rise in cases like many other countries have, compared to the other big European countries like the France and the UK, Italy, Spain, which have generally basically had the performance of the US, tons of cases, tons of deaths, Germany has not. And it's not because Germany had more stringent lockdowns. It's because Germans are just more orderly people, we might say.
They like to follow rules, no matter who gives them.
So that's another example that goes, kind of in the count. If we want to be social sciencey, that's the kind of social sciencey example. And the Pacific Rim countries, same thing, right? Yes, the Pacific Rim countries did use certain aggressive tactics like contact tracing in South Korea, for example. But in general, the big success of East Asia has been, discipline, wearing masks, washing hands, hygiene.
So you're just kissing up to Rob because Rob's whole theory for everything is culture first, politics second. So your argument is national cultures made a difference.
Rob's got a point.
I think there's a strong case for it.
I think you're right. I think I have made a strong case for it. So does it bother you, Ovik, that as you said before, does it bother you that if I am talking to somebody about on the right, if I'm talking to somebody about masks or the vaccine or the lockdowns, and I refer to you as an authority, it helps if I say Ovik Roy, who actually is a well-known conservative. Is that a problem for us now that we actually can't accept a fact from somebody who's on a different partisan side?
Well, I will say that I feel like we at FREAP, at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, my think tank, I feel like we have been able to effectively make the case. Of course, we are a minority view, right? The majority view in the elite community has been lock everything down, keep the schools closed, et cetera. But look, we were able to publish 2 major white papers on this topic that were read by policymakers, both at the federal level and at the state and local level. One on reopening the economy back in April, another on reopening schools that we published in July. Those were both turned into cover stories in the weekend Wall Street Journal. So we've been able to get our case out there, and I think what's been particularly helpful is that we've been vindicated, right? So we said in April, the Scott Gottlieb claim that we're going to have a magical treatment for COVID-19 and the lockdown's only going to take 2 weeks. We argued that was deeply flawed on multiple levels and that we actually had to find a way to live with this virus and maximally reopen the economy while being prudent with the risks. And when it came to school reopenings, actually we should be more aggressive with school reopenings because the evidence from Europe and elsewhere is that school reopenings are not leading to an increase in transmission, particularly for children under the age of 12. And both of those arguments have been vindicated, right? So like when Texas reopened, when Florida reopened in June, July, there were all these people predicting, that there was going to be a Holocaust, and there wasn't a Holocaust. Yes, we've seen a rise in cases, but there has not been a Holocaust. The statistics have been come in much lower than what was predicted back in April and May by the Atlantic and New York Times, et cetera. On the school side, we're totally vindicated, right? The places that have reopened schools have done very, very well. We have not seen a rise in infections. And in fact, now you're seeing headlines in the Washington Post and New York Times saying things like, contrary to expert consensus, there are not infections taking place in schools, and scientists are puzzled by this.
Right.
I loved your NPR voice, Avik. That was
very good. Yeah.
So I mean, all that to say that, are we persuading everyone? Of course not. But I feel fortunate that we haven't been completely deplatformed. I'm sure that Twitter is not promoting what we have to say and helping it circulate as widely as it could, but we're getting the word out there, and people who have a healthy skepticism for expert opinion are getting to hear what we have to say. Thanks to people like you having me on the show.
Well, thank you.
He's speaking to me. I think he's speaking directly to me.
I think he's speaking to all of us.
You're not involved in that. No.
Definitely.
All of us sensible, healthily skeptical, and we all wear masks.
When we say goodbye to Avik, can I say, Avik, will you stop writing about this flu stuff and get back to our book?
Yes.
Avik and I are writing before the flu hit, Avik and I were working on a book called Why Are Asians So Stupid?
Well, they're getting smarter, aren't they? Hey, this Supreme Court case coming up, we definitely have to.
Oh, yeah.
We have a lot to work on.
Yeah, that's going to be 6-3 for us.
Yeah, I'm eager for that. I mean, I've spent my entire adult life fulminating against the true institutional racism in higher education, which is the incredible and relentless discrimination against Asians. And that's something that I know John also feels passionate about. So yes, John, I will email you later today, and we should write something on the election, John, on the election results, and to talk about that piece of it.
AKA why Asian moms should be president.
And
everybody in the country is going to study, and there'll be no more organized sports.
Yeah, no democracy. Let's be honest.
Way too many piano lessons.
Yeah. What I want now are the secret memos between the two of you, because John's saying, "Look, I'm angling for a permanent shot on the podcast. I want to get rid of this Peter Robinson guy. I think if you can just help me with this, set the stage for future podcasts where I pop up in Peter's stead." It's a very nice little deal you guys got going there.
Well, that time that John was on Comedy Central with Jon Stewart and just slayed him.
Right.
That was like one of the great moments in 21st century television history. I think about it often.
Drove him off the air.
Mm-hmm. They'll be saying that in 2099. Thanks very much. I look forward to having you at some point to say, okay, it's over. It's a long time gone. What did we do that was right? And what can we look forward to in the future? But unfortunately, everybody stay tuned and keep listening to his COVID-19 podcast for the latest information from the Ricochet Audio Network. See you later.
Thanks everybody.
Bye, Avik.
The problem, what I have with the lockdowns, the first round of them were so hard, so long, to so little effect that they killed so much. And this ripple effect that keeps happening now. Every time I talk to somebody, they're not going back to work. Well, they're not going back until the spring. Some of them are just not going back at all. I heard about another organization that they just said, yeah, well, you know what? Our lease is up. We're not going to go back. Everyone's going to work at home. And this sort of rolling readjustment of what our life is one of the things that's driven me absolutely crazy about this. I read the other day that dry cleaning stores, I may have mentioned this last week, dry cleaning stores are starting to drop because nobody's got work clothes that they want to have clean anymore. And it's fun because I still go to work in a shirt and a tie to keep up the old standards. But the fact of the matter is that most people aren't, and the old uniforms are gone. But here's the thing. You still need underwear. This is not a world in which you can go absolutely commando 24/7, even if you're zooming in with a tubing, because there's a certain standards that you have to maintain. And maybe because you haven't gotten out to the store as much as you can because we're all locked down. And the underwear situation is getting kind of dodgy and stringy and full of holes. Well, good for you, because you're listening to this. And because you're listening to this, I'm here to tell you about Mack Weldon. Whatever men's basics you need, Mack Weldon's got you covered, frankly, literally and figuratively, with unmatched comfort and fit. And Mack Weldon has everything: socks, shirts, hoodies, underwear, polos, active shorts. And they promise that all of it has comfort and a consistent fit. They have a wide range of customized fabrics, such as 18-hour, silver, air knits, dry knit, warm knit. Go to their website and you'll learn about all of these fabrics and what they mean for you. They can all help keep you up with no matter what your day looks like, frankly, if you're exercising or just staying in one place. But more than that, though, Mack Weldon provides unrivaled service with a totally free loyalty program. Now, level 1 gets you free shipping for life. Yeah. Once you reach level 2 by spending $200, you get 20% off every order for the next year. It keeps going. And Mack Weldon wants you to be comfortable, first and foremost. So if you don't like your first pair of underwear, you can keep them. Keep them, and they'll still refund you with no questions asked. So for 20% off your first order, visit MackWeldon.com/Ricochet and enter the promo code, all together now, Ricochet. That's MackWeldon.com/Ricochet. Promo code Ricochet for 20% off Mack Weldon stuff. Mack Weldon is reinventing men's basics, and we thank Mack Weldon for sponsoring this, the Ricochet Podcast. And now we welcome Jim Garrity. Garrity the Indispensable, as Hewitt has called him for years. He's going to have to prove that to us here. He is, of course, senior political correspondent for the National Review, yay, and writes the must-read morning newsletter, The Morning Jolt. Subscribe to it. You must, you should, you ought to. In his spare time, of course, he's a long-suffering Jets fan. As a Vikings fan, I get that. And apparently does an uncanny impression of Ted Cruz. And if you're not following the video feed, you will see that he actually has the facial hair of Ted Cruz himself to make the bit even more believable. Follow him on Twitter, Jim Garrity. And welcome, buddy. How you doing?
All right, guys, it's really good to see you.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic. I wish
I
we were all on a
almost
ship.
believed you there.
I'm Peter Robinson,
we were all on a
by
ship.
the way.
Wish we were all on a cruise ship bobbing along somewhere, but that
Oh.
would earn us all the cruise icon, wouldn't it?
When are we going to do that again?
We'll get to that in a second here, because I have the feeling that there's a sort of cruise ship ahoy, rhino squish division that's forming in the party between those who believe that this was stolen and those who think that there may have been irregularities, but it wasn't. So you wrote a piece in NR, Tough Love, shall we say. Trump was not stabbed in the back. Let me quote. Besides, if never Trump Republicans did cost Trump a handful of electoral votes, just whose fault was that? Should those Republicans who voted for Biden be berated for not recognizing the dire consequences of electing a Democratic president? Or does some of the responsibility fall at Trump's feet? So do you think that there was a stab in the back? I gather not, but I'm just giving you a setup to repeat what you said in the column in your inimitable style.
Yeah, but one of the great ironies is that this morning, Tim Miller of the Bulwark took exceptional objection to the piece, and I believe called it stupid, and the analysis was specious, because first was, how do you define somebody who's never Trump? And the measuring stick that I use, looking at the election results, as of late last week, it's possible that exact numbers that are quoted in the story, you want to adjust them a bit. I don't think proportion really changes very much. I used people who had voted for a Republican in either the gubernatorial race or the Senate race, but not Trump for president. And one of the objections I've heard from Tim is that, no, some of the people who were never Trump have become never Republican. And thus, the true definition of a never Trump voter is someone who voted Democrats top to bottom. Now, I call that Democrats.
Yeah.
Right. And at this point, your definition, because if you want to say, Max Boot,
Right.
And was he the one with the fedora?
Yeah.
I think he is
Republican.
Okay. I think actually the fedora is part of his persona.
And the Lincoln Project and the guys at the Bulwark. If you want to use, did they swing the election? No. If you want to define it a little more broadly and to say, okay, how about voters who are generally and usually vote Republican, but could not bring themselves to vote for Trump? Is that a better definition of never Trump? Now, the question is, if that's your definition, how do you measure it? When I looked at, I decided to look at down ticket. A couple people have said you should use House races. Okay, I guess. Tim Miller's objection is like, well, there's variance of candidates in the Senate races, but there's not variance. He didn't seem to worry about variance of candidates in the House races. I'm not sure. I don't really follow the logic of that one, but that was my measuring stick. It's like, okay. And I looked at if every single person who had voted for a Republican senator or voted for a Republican governor had voted for Trump, well, how would that be different? How different would the results be? It would be 11 electoral votes. That would be it. Now, if you want to say, where did a never Trump voter make a big difference? I think probably the best example you can find would be the congressional district around Omaha, Nebraska. Trump got 4 of the electoral votes out of Nebraska. He lost 1, kind of like it happened back in 2008 as well. Omaha did not vote for Donald Trump. They voted for Joe Biden. Now, the intriguing thing is that the Republican House member who represents that congressional district, got reelected by about 5 or 6 percentage points. There was about a 5 or 6 ticket splitting amount there. So there's one where, look, it's Omaha, it's Nebraska. It's not, it's not necessarily Wyoming, but it's a fairly Republican-leaning, conservative-leaning congressional district as far as these things go. And it voted for Republicans. It just didn't vote for Donald Trump. That's probably the best example you can find of that. When I use my measuring stick of Senate races and governor's races, I'll be the first to tell you, Olympia Snowe is not the same as Donald Trump. And they appeal to a really different kind of, group of voters. Olympia Snowe won re-election. Donald Trump won one congressional district in Maine and then lost the other one. And he lost the statewide vote. So Maine is the other state that splits the electoral votes by congressional district. Trump got one. Biden got the other 3. The other 2 cases where you saw a Republican winning winning down ticket were Vermont and New Hampshire, where the governors, Scott in Vermont and Sununu in New Hampshire, won re-election by a landslide, and Trump lost both those states. And by the way, New Hampshire, which had been kind of close in 2016, was really not that close this time. You add that up. But the thing is that, again, I will recognize the appeal of a Governor Scott or the appeal of a Governor Sununu is really different from the appeal of Donald Trump. But so that I'm looking around trying to say, my conclusion of, well, actually, Never Trump was really not that significant pro or con. It's pissed off 2 demographics. The first is being people who like to identify as Never Trump, including Tim Miller, and I assume the rest of the crew over at the Bulwark. And I suspect it's also really pissing off the people who hate Never Trump, who want to use it as a scapegoat and who thinks these guys are the root of all evil. Announcing, actually, they didn't make that big a difference, certainly not on a consequential level of the broader election. I have managed to piss off everybody, which seems to be my trademark lately.
So, Jim, can I ask you, I got 3 questions here. The first one is sort of a broader one. How interesting is this election? Because it seems to me that we've come up with a lot of phrases and terms to use, but a huge portion of the people who decide the next president do not really loyally identify with any particular party. They're not Never Trump. They're not pro-Trump. They're not Democrats. They're not Republicans. They kind of go in and they vote the way they vote. Is that fair? Are we just making a lot of noise?
Hey, look, I think this is as you said, intriguing, significant, and obviously very consequential election. I think one of the things we should take away from this, and I say this as somebody who's been very critical of Trump. I guess this is the right crowd to. I didn't vote for him either time, and I was extraordinarily unlikely to vote for him at any point of this time. I also think he didn't do that bad. I think that, there was a point on election night where okay, Trump has won Florida and by a much bigger margin, than he did last time. He won Ohio, and it wasn't that close. He came very close to winning North Carolina. He came very close to winning Georgia, and he wasn't all that far away from winning Arizona either. If he had, and Pennsylvania, all of them were within 2 or 3 points. Heck, you could throw in Michigan in that category.
Right.
So you look at we 3 points better in each one of those states, and we're looking at a second term for Trump. That's
100,000. 100,000 vote difference in 3 states, and we'd be talking about what a wizard he was in the establishment of a new Republican dominant coalition for another 4 years.
I mean, the only benefit that Joe Biden has right now is he got one or two more states, but it's still 100,000 votes across four states, right? And he's going to come in with a House Democratic majority that's actually dwindling, but it's still there. So he starts his term in a slightly better foot than Donald Trump started his term, but it doesn't feel like the results on Tuesday night, election night, were all that earth-shattering. So my other question to you is this: what is interesting about what happened? I mean, is it you're talking about the ticket splitters, which again is the kind of phrase that, I mean, in terms of it's kind of like the privileged language that people who are partisans use to describe people who aren't partisans, that somehow it's weird that they ticket split. How important is that those people went against the Republican, against Trump? If you're a Republican, if you're at the RNC, what conclusions are you drawing right now?
Yeah, I feel like there's 2 different conversations going on in the country right now.
Right.
And there's one that you hear a great deal of if you're paying attention to what we usually call the mainstream media. CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Time Magazine, and you can throw in BuzzFeed, Axios, those kind of guys. And the dominant tone of the coverage for most of the year, for understandable reasons, was, God, look at the pandemic, look at the economy. This is going to be a blue wave. Trump's going to lose by a bunch. Republicans are going to get slammed in the Senate. This conversation loves to fall in love with what I call the Great Southern Democratic hopes, whether it was going to be Harrison in South Carolina. There's a little less hype about the challenger to Mitch McConnell this time. But basically, every cycle, there's at least one.
She raised
Democrat
a lot of money. I mean, she raised a whole lot of money. There are a lot of people who thought she was going to win, and Jamie Harrison was going to win. What did they spend? They spent $170 million between the two of them.
Yeah. Harrison broke the previous record, which was by Beto O'Rourke 2 years ago. And it was a very similar phenomenon. It's never that, Ted Cruz or Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham, it's not like they suddenly broke with their voters or anything like that. What it was is that Democrats outside of those states really, really hate Ted Cruz. And I don't understand this because I have done so much. I became a conservative because of two things: Jesus Christ and the Constitution. And I did that because Jesus Christ wrote the Constitution.
That's pretty good, by the way.
Thank you. I lapse into that every now and then.
Yeah, right.
It's not like, that South Carolina suddenly decided they hate Lindsey Graham. It's not like, Kentucky suddenly decided they hate Mitch McConnell. You can go in and say, do you approve of your current congressman? And people are like, there's always some grumbliness. But it was not these states turned blue. What it was Democrats like, oh, I really hate that guy. Let me give some money to the guy running against him, regardless of whether they have any particular chances of victory.
Did it help Lindsey Graham that he had walked in a pro-life Supreme Court justice about a week before the election in South Carolina?
Probably. But I have an extensive network of sources in South Carolina,
okay,
mostly that I'm related to. Now,
okay.
My parents retired down there. My dad's very active in the Hilton Head area Republican Party groups. And they were fairly confident the whole time. They were kind of surprised by the polling. And we should point out, Quinnipiac polling deserves to have rotten fruit hurled as it walks through the streets, because 3 times they said the Harrison-Graham poll was tied. Graham won by 10 points. There's really no indication this thing was ever that close. And you could, because I really thought Harrison was going to give us one of those Beto O'Rourke. Like, I enjoy making fun of the guy because I think he's an overgrown guy who dreams of being a rock star.
But he came close. But he came close, though.
But yeah, 3 points. Coming within 3 points in Texas is nothing to sneeze at.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Harrison did do that.
To be the head of the Small Business Association or some other tiny agency in the federal government.
Yeah. But anyway, so I thought there's this conversation going on in the mainstream media and left circles that wildly overestimates the success of Democrats and always expects a blue wave and all that stuff. Maybe Beto expects a blue rave. And below it, there's this under conversation. Maybe some of it happens at places like National Review and Ricochet, but even like further out, like, Fox Nation and maybe it, where the expectation was Trump would win in a landslide. And we're going to win back the House, and things are going to be, and that wasn't really realistic either. And that there's this idea of, Hunter Biden's laptop is going to be this huge game changer. It's a very online conversation. It's very,
So what accounts for the big failures then? Because this is real money involved, right? Because if you could do this, you can do marketing, you can sell products. I mean, I see your point, Jim, where you're saying that some polling places just become echo chambers for the people who are buying the services. But if you could actually produce accurate numbers, you would make them in. All the incentives are for you to be accurate, right? So why do they get it so wrong again?
The hero of this election is Kalahi over Trafalgar Group. And they were pretty darn, they were closer than everybody else in 2016. Probably about a couple of weeks before the election, he did a really revealing and useful interview with my boss, Rich Lowry. Yeah, and by the way, it's always a good idea to call your boss's interviews revealing and useful and must read by everyone.
Right.
But even if he wasn't my boss, I think this was, because
what did he reveal, though?
Pollsters call generally in the evening time. You got somebody you're trying to get your dinner into your kids. You're trying to get the kids ready for bed, help with homework. All the kids are learning from home right now. And a lot of these questions, a lot of these pollsters, answering all their questions would take 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. A lot of people don't want to answer the phone because of the caller ID issues. And the way pollsters had always overcome this is, we'll just call more people. We'll just keep calling and keep calling and keep calling until we have a large enough group in our samples. We'll make sure the sample has the right, it's racially balanced, it's gender balanced, it's age and geographic balance and all that. And we'll try, we'll just overcome it by making a lot more calls.
Well, this is not a trade secret. This is not like the formula for Coke or the McDonald's, but how to make the McRib, which should be a state secret. I mean, everybody could have done this after 4 years ago.
Can I try out a theory with you, Jim? Sure. Because there's two kinds of pollings going on. There's the polling that's done by people that then release the polls to the press, and then they kind of have to release their crosstabs and show their work, which Trafalgar did not do, to be fair. And then there's the other kind of polling, which is the campaigns do themselves. That is proprietary information, strategic information. They don't release it. It's like their playbook. They're not going to let anybody see what they know, right? It seems to me that the campaigns, both of them, had very good polling, very accurate internals. The reason that the Trump people went apoplectic about Fox's early call from Arizona was that they really thought that they had a shot there, and they weren't wrong, right? There was a lot of mystery in Arizona, a lot of late ballots, all that stuff in Maricopa County. They weren't wrong about that. And the reason that the Trump campaign was so incredibly confident about Florida was that they had better numbers. But those are their numbers. They're not the numbers they're going to release to everybody else. They didn't want to let the Biden people find out. So it isn't really polling so much as it's free polling. The kind of polling that you do and you're just not going to get paid for it. It's like, well, you got to call 16 to 20 people to get one response. It's like, it's easier to call fewer people and then just put some pixie dust over it. And doesn't that create this kind of weird moment where all the polls seem to be converging?
Yeah, and we can lament how bad this is and how frustrating this is. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which obviously is going to be covering these Georgia runoffs a great deal, reported earlier this week about a new poll about how things are in the runoff. And they said Republicans were up by a narrow margin. I think Perdue was up by like 3 or 4, and Loeffler was up by 1. Now, here's the thing. That's a perfectly plausible result. I can't say, that poll is definitely wrong. But this same pollster was polling Missouri this up until November, and they had Trump winning the state by 5 or 6 points.
Right.
Well, Trump won by 16 points. Right. So this pollster has just gotten something that was kind of off by a bunch. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is like, hey, look what they got. Look what they said. And there's no stop. Didn't mention in the article. There was no indication of this is a poll. Pollsters just had a real problem with getting the right kind of response. There's no Surgeon General's warning. Right. Rob, James, John, we've got kids out there on the streets who are reading polls and getting addicted to this stuff without any type of intervention program.
Well, I think in California, we just legalized that, didn't we?
That's right.
In Oregon, you could buy it on the street. Yeah. You don't need a doctor's note.
We need a 7-day waiting period before releasing this.
Yeah. So just 2 more questions about polls.
Sure.
One is the cliche is, or whatever it is, the boilerplate argument is, the reason that you want to manipulate the polls is because it manipulates turnout. That messed up polls are a way to in some way distort the actual result because people react a certain way to certain polls. Is that even 2% true? It doesn't seem true to me at all. We just had the biggest turnout election in history after the second biggest turnout 4 years ago. It seems to me that these polls up, down, they may be emotionally disturbing and disappointing for you if you were a Democrat in 2016 or a conservative in 2020, but they had no effect on turnout.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the emotional significance of polls is based on this. And people probably remember concrete examples from long ago, like the networks calling the race for Reagan on election night 1980, before the polls had closed on the West Coast.
Right.
And down-ticket Democrats getting slaughtered because a lot of Democrats the race is over. The Florida 2000, right? Where the polls were still open on the Panhandle, and the networks called it, and people were discouraged that they're, So based on those, very vivid examples, it's understandable people say, every bad poll is discouraging turnout. I think you look at the turnout for this one, and I can't picture people who are not interested, although maybe one very intriguing, close to home example. I live in Fairfax County, Virginia. This is pretty darn blue. It's 2-1 Democrat. It's not, Republicans exist. I think Trump is a bad match. We generally like our Bob McDonnell, keep the trains running on time, establishment Republicans. but turnout was less than it was in 2016. And you know, if I take this camera and we walk up and down this, well, a bunch of people took down their Biden-Harris signs by now, but like,
yeah,
this is as, you know, it's government workers, it's a lot of immigrants, it's a lot of young people. This is the fruit basket of votes for the Biden campaign. And I think turnout was about 77%. It wasn't low, but turnout was 82% when it was Trump Hillary. So I'm kind of looking at that and scratching, like, I was a little surprised by that, because like, what, the stakes weren't high enough for you in this election? It wasn't big enough? The only thing I can think of is that if, you know, Joe Biden being Joe Biden, whether people were a little less enthused about him, and maybe, you know, on the margins, you saw a little bit of a drop in some likely Democrats. But again, by sheer scale, but the other thing is, if you say, oh, people think people see uncompetitive polls and they don't think their vote is needed,
right?
Maybe that happened here. I don't know.
Okay, so I just two last questions from me. One, Georgia. If you're running the recounts for the Republicans in Georgia, which is better for you? Is it better for you to say, as soon as possible, hey, Republicans in Georgia, we have President Joe Biden and his crazy Marxists. You have to vote Republican. If you don't, you're giving away the store. Or is it better for them to say, you know what, Donald Trump was fairly elected, and it was stolen from him, and there've been a lot of chicanery, and create a kind of I don't know what kind of a protest vote movement. I don't know what that would be. Which is the better? In speaking of just Georgia and Georgia Republicans specifically, because a lot of them voted already. Which is the better argument, you think, to make to get them to vote now on January 5th?
I was very, I don't want to say encouraged, but you probably saw the video of Chuck Schumer up in New York shortly after the networks had said, yes, Biden now has 270 electoral votes. And Chuck Schumer, being the warm, effervescent, and charming figure that he is, had said that today, you know, then we win Georgia, and Georgia for the world, or something along those lines. Then we change the world. And you know, it's going to show up in a bunch of ads for Purdue and Loeffler. This message of Georgians, the future of the country is on you, and the Democrats will have completely unconstricted control over everything, is exactly, you know, that's a very compelling message to drive that.
New York Democrat Chuck Schumer. Yeah. I think I can hear the dog whistle.
By the way, I terrific news. Apparently Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez genuinely thinks she's going to go down to Georgia to help drive Democratic turnout. I believe the National Republican Senatorial Committee has already agreed to pay for the tickets.
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding me? I'll fly the jet. Yeah.
AOC wants the Democrats to win. Will be on the side of the bus. Right. And we'll drive all across the state.
Paul Krugman wants them to come down like freedom riders in buses and establish residency.
There you go. Yeah. As for the idea of, like, you know, oh, do you want people fired up believing the election was stolen from Trump? You probably saw the other day, President Trump jumped onto Twitter and said, Dominion deleted 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide. Right. Data analysis finds 221,000 Pennsylvania votes switched from President Trump to Biden. 941,000 Trump votes deleted. Right.
No offense, your cruise is better. Your cruise is better.
I'm trying to do Trump anger. He's like, usually much more slow.
Yeah. You got to learn Biden now. You got to learn a Biden.
Biden's hard. Well, anyway, so wait, finish your.
But the general gist is, out of all. Someone's decided that they really don't like the Trump impression.
That's Trafalgar. That's Trafalgar. They want to talk to you for 30 minutes. They got a 30-minute poll for you.
Yeah. So the short version is, out of all the messages, the machines are going to steal your votes, and all your votes for Republican candidates are going to be switched to votes for Democratic candidates. Does not strike me as optimal messaging to get Georgia Republicans to go out and vote.
Jim, can I ask you a question about how this ties in with what Trump should do? So Trump's not conceding. It sounds to me like you think he should concede, but why isn't he conceding? Does it have anything to do with Georgia? Do people in D.C. think that maintaining this sense of outrage is going to help us win the Georgia seats? Or it seems to me it's going to be harmful, because both of the candidates are just going to be asked every day from here till the first week of January, do you agree with what Trump said? Do you agree with what Trump said? Do you agree with Trump saying that the Georgia electoral system is corrupt, and the Republican Secretary of State is corrupt? And I mean, doesn't this hurt the chances of winning in Georgia? I mean,
Trump would do something that would hurt the rest of the party? God, I got to get my head around that idea. I guess it could happen. I mean, on the one hand, you've got the idea that this is some sort of deliberate strategy or four-level chess or something else like that. Or it could just be him acting like an angry toddler and sore loser and just venting his spleen. I'm going to have to weigh which of these two options strikes me as more likely. But no, I look, if you were, yes, I do think Trump should concede. I think we should go forward with all of this. I have no problem with Georgia doing a recount. I have no problem doing recounts at any of these contested states for the purposes of accuracy of the vote. I don't think a recount or any of these, and John, you maybe know more about this than I do. Trump is making these sweeping statements on Twitter that the election's being stolen and machines are changing votes and all that kind of stuff. You look at the actual Trump lawsuits. Generally, they are smaller scale. They're generally talking about a couple hundred votes here, a couple hundred votes there. A lot of them are about poll watching and being able to have access to counting the votes, which, by the way, strike me as all perfectly legitimate issues to raise in court. Couple of them are about kind of echoing the Sharpies in markers in Arizona theory that this was causing overvotes and stuff. It didn't work. State Attorney General looked at it and didn't see any issues there. But if you want to use the courts, go right ahead. But don't fool yourself into thinking that anything that happens in the courts or that any recount is going to change 12,000 vote margin in Arizona, 14,000 vote margin in Georgia, 21,000 vote margin in Wisconsin, 37,000 Nevada, 60,000 Pennsylvania, 146,000 in Michigan. No, I didn't. I had to write that down. I didn't have.
You have it pinned on a. Is it on a sticky note by your monitor? I hope it is.
A sticky note under my eylids.
Yeah, right.
My pink,
So okay, so I got a question, and then I know we got to let you go. Some Republicans are going to eventually have to go and say to Donald Trump, "You got to leave. It's over. You got to leave." I think we assume that's going to happen. It's going to happen sooner rather than later, but we assume it's going to happen. Just on the other side, don't you think that some smart Democrats should be going to Chuck Schumer, who had a terrible election night, or Nancy Pelosi, who had an equally terrible election night, and say, you both got to go? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any move on the Democrats to refresh and change their leadership, which now seems superannuated and failed. I mean, we're all talking about Donald Trump, and it's true. He's like locked in his bunker and tweeting nonsense, but we all know how it's going to turn out. We know that Joe Biden's going to take office in January 23rd, whatever date it is, right? But it seems like the Democrats are going to re-up Chuck Schumer after his terrible performance and re-up Nancy Pelosi after her terrible performance. Good for Republicans, but what on earth is going on in the minds of Democrats?
Yeah, I think the case is stronger for Pelosi than for Schumer. Schumer can justifiably say, look, I thought we had a good chance in North Carolina, and we got the reincarnation of John Edwards. I could have been more off color there,
fair.
But I saw the Zoom in with Tubin line from James, and I was like, hey, do I want to go? But I kept it clean.
Yeah, you kept it
a
clean.
bunch of these other Democratic expectations were basically getting high on their own supply. I talked about South Carolina. You're gonna need the inside straight to elect a Republican in Kansas, or to elect a Democrat in Kansas. Didn't happen. There were a bunch of ones where they really should have recognized that no, these were never going to be that competitive. You're going to have an uphill climb against Joni Ernst in Iowa. She's a pretty darn good candidate, But in the House, kind of fascinating because this is what I'm kind of clicking refresh on every couple of minutes. So right now, Republicans have 202 seats in the House that are the races that have been called.
Right.
They're leading enough to get them to 213. Now, some of those might flip towards the end, but a bunch of them, I went through this in the corner earlier this week. They're pretty sizable. A couple thousand. You're not going to find necessarily them in one pile of votes somewhere. And oh, by the way, most of the counts aren't counting a district in Louisiana where they're going to a runoff, but both of the candidates in the runoff are Republicans. So Republicans can feel pretty good about that one. You add it all up, that gets you to 214. Remember, it only takes 218 to flip the change, right?
That's enormous.
Right? It's reaching the point where somebody had the sharp observation yesterday that if you're the Biden administration and you're looking to staff the executive branch, you really can't afford to pick any House Democrats, because if a House Democrat resigns to serve in the cabinet, you have to have a special election, and it takes a couple of months. And oh, by the way, every House of Representatives loses a few along the way. Some of them die. Some of them get a good opportunity in the private sector and decide to jump. Some of them resign in scandal. If one delayed flight out of California, and the Democrats may not be, we're going to have to postpone votes because they're not going to have enough people to have a majority, conceivably. So, that's kind of the secret story of this. And what's baffling to me is that it is now November 13th.
Right.
Not just are we not, I haven't heard about anybody talking about challenging Pelosi. I mean, maybe it'll take, take root in the next 6 weeks, but so far.
So if you're an enterprising Republican minority leader in the House, you're thinking you could be speaker in 2022.
Yeah. If the traditional pendulum effect and, the bad effects for the president's party kick in, then yeah. The one kind of asterisk I might put to that is that usually when we've seen these big midterms go badly, it went badly for Republicans in 2018, badly for the Democrats in 2010, 2014, 98, it was the lone exception, 2006 against Bush. The one exception is usually you've got a majority party. The president's swept into office. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff that were not part of their mandate and are freaking out voters. And that's what generates it. If Republicans keep the Senate, the Biden administration will probably not be passing crazy things. And that will probably mitigate that backlash effect in the
I love this.
But there won't be many seats. There won't be enough.
McConnell's going to save the Biden presidency.
Oh, yeah.
Stranger things.
I look forward.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I look forward to Speaker.
His lucky stars.
I look forward to Speaker of the House AOC standing behind Biden at the State of the Union address and tearing up his speech because his draft of the Green New Deal does not include the immediate grounding of the entire airline fleet,
right,
the elimination of private cars. Well, Jim, we'll have you on again, and of course, and we'll discuss all these things again. Of course, I just have the feeling that saying that polling is dead after this is sort of like the people who said that irony is dead after 9/11. These things tend to reassert themselves. And once again, when we find polls that confirm our priors and seem to say something good for our guy, we're going to believe in polls. I want America that believes in polls again. So we'll probably get to that point and have you on to tell us why we're wrong or right.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Remember, it's like Monty Python said of the parrot. It's only resting.
It's only resting. Exactly right.
Thanks, that's Joe Biden you're talking about, right?
Right.
Yes, it is. Joe Biden, a parrot nailed to a perch. That somehow is a fine analogy for the 4 years to come. Talk to you later, Jim. Good luck. See you around the corner.
Thanks, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
We got some other stuff to talk about, but before we do, I have a harbinger of things to come. Literally that. So a different kind of sponsor for this episode, the Jordan Harbinger Show. It's not often that we talk about other shows because we're a show when we want you all to listen, but there are other important things out there. Harbinger's one of them. Apple named the Jordan Harbinger Show one of the best of 2018. It's aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and then come to your own conclusions about what's happening. There's an episode for everyone, no matter what you're into. The show covers stories like how a professional art forger somehow made millions of dollars while being chased by the feds and the mafia. Jordan's also done an episode about birth control and how it can alter the partners we pick and how going on or off the pill can change elements of our personalities. In other words, it's wide-ranging. You won't find one set of viewpoints on Jordan's show. No, the podcast covers a lot, but one constant is Jordan's ability to pull useful pieces of advice from his guests. So you'll find something you can apply to your own life, whether it's an actionable routine change that boosts your productivity or just a slight mindset tweak that changes how you see the world. Go to jordanharbinger.com, subscribe, or search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's H-A-R-B as in boy, I-N as in Nancy, G-E-R on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. And we thank The Jordan Harbinger Show for having the faith to sponsor this, the Ricochet podcast. But now before we go, we got a couple of things. We always do. Can't just drop off a guest and sally off and saunter away. No, we got to bring John into something that we do every week. I don't know if John's ever been present for what we proudly call
James Lilacs Member Post of the Week.
Did everybody hear that sounder? The first notes cut out as though the recording apparatus was so stunned that it just shut its ears in horror. Can we hear that again? We paid for it. Let me hear that
again. The James Lilacs Member Post of the Week.
And this week.
That's what POW is.
Yeah.
LPOW.
I thought we were going to talk about prisoners of war.
Well, it's
No.
it's often the
Same
same.
thing.
It feels the same way while you're waiting for the theme. That's for sure.
Rob looks like he's got a little striped prison garb on right now.
That's right. My sweater.
He's been trapped by Lilacs' prison.
Actually, no. Rob's
Post of the week for years.
Rob's striped shirt is more to me of a Russian sailor uniform. I was going to mention that, but since this isn't a visual medium, a radio medium, and so it is a radio medium, John realizes that once the sounder for the Lilacs post of the week has been sounded, that he should immediately interrupt with his own voice instead of mine. That's that keen attention to radio formatics that ensure Peter Robinson will be back here next week. Anyway,
I don't know. Peter does that too, by the way.
Yeah.
That he does.
He makes sounds. I've heard him make sighs and sounds.
And it's, you know what? It's rude, James, and I really I feel for you because I know
what
that interruption is the worst possible thing, and it makes me sad to think that.
It is, or you had nothing. You just had an interruption for the sake of interrupting?
Just exactly that.
Okay. Well, this would be the point in a courtroom drama then where somebody stands up and accuses Rob of his patented podcast theatrics like Hamilton Berger used to do, which brings us to the post of the week. It's from Mark Camp, who asked, and I had to read this as soon as I saw it. Was Perry Mason a great TV series? It's like, what do we even have to talk? What is he going to say? So he said this. Without going through the details, I'll summarize. I think it was seriously flawed, but nevertheless a great TV series. It could not be great if the fictional character Mason was not a great fictional hero. He could not be perfect. You would have to raise hard questions. Was doing this or that dodgy act morally justifiable? And did Perry care? Then Raymond Burr and the actors portraying Della Street, Paul Drake, and the others would have to project these questions to us, even create little creative variations on the questions and the proposed answers to us. Did Mason put forth in Burr's interpretation, create an identifiable human character for us, even if we never read the book? Now, I think he's trolling us here because, without question, the Perry Mason television show is great, and I think Rob would agree. It presented an iconic character, a completely dependable staff, second characters, and it delivered every week on what it promised. There were no arcs. There were no 12 seasons stories. There was a crime, there was an unjustly accused person, and then there was the drama that concluded. Oftentimes, of course, with somebody in the speaker's gallery standing up saying, yes, I killed him, and I'd do it again, which never happens. But in the Mason universe, it works. So why is this the post of the week? To show that in Ricochet we talk about more than politics. B, to show that we can have interesting conversations that bring in all of this information from the audience, because all of a sudden you had people saying, well, you know, the William Warren version in the 30s had a character of Mason that fit the book. And then you had somebody saying, you know, when I watched the HBO version, I was wondering whether or not there was going to be a sexual dynamic between Perry and Paul as befits the modern world. So Ricochet contains multitudes, and we're not just politics, it's culture as well. And to compare the Masons of the past century and this one is just something that people had a little bit of fun with. So, John, you're a lawyer. You guys probably regard the Mason show with amusement because it's ridiculous. Those weren't actual courtroom dramas. Those were grand jury hearings that we were seeing. So a lot of that stuff can be waved away. But when you were a kid and you wanted to be a lawyer, was Perry a hero, or was he some stolid, perfect thing walking around like a human embodiment of a law book that couldn't be taken seriously because he was so perfect?
James, I'm not kissing your butt here, but I learned everything I know about law from Star Trek. There is so much law in Star Trek. Oh, come on. Remember when Captain James T. Kirk was put on trial? Right,
yes.
Court-martialed for allegedly ejecting the tube with his friend in it during a storm.
And in the 24th century, we learned that nobody had thought that visual records could be manipulated and faked, which I just is like, okay, well, we figured that one out a long time ago. Who was James Tiberius Kirk's lawyer?
Yeah,
in that
he was a Perry Mason takeoff, wasn't he? I mean, he was.
No,
Perry Mason.
he was Elisha Cook Jr. Elisha Cook Jr. in his
character
in his later years, because he was always a nervous little pop-eyed geek who was always suffering some indignity in the old noir movies, but he had this great role as an old country lawyer who comes to the defense of Kirk and proves his case. Yes, Elisha Cook.
And then there was in the new generation, which I really don't like that much, but in the new generation, remember they put Data on trial. That was a good case. Right. That was a great lawyer. Where Captain Picard was the defense attorney.
Right, and the person who was trying to establish the data was not a human being actually turned up in the Picard television show with the opposite idea about the sentient life and whether or not androids had sentience, and therefore the provisions like protection under the Constitution.
This will tell you about the world I live in, is that there have been several scholars who have written long, long articles about whether the legal system of Star Trek makes sense and whether we should adopt it rather than our own.
Those people are seriously deluded, but I would love to have a podcast about that, because the whole economic, cultural, social, religious milieu of that Roddenberry fantasy, you take it and you hand it off to all these other creative people, and it takes 30 years and it flowers into something quite unusual. Right now, Rob is rolling his eyes. Our producer is bored as sin.
I'm literally now answering emails.
Yeah, because we've strayed out. So I'm going to tell you this before we go, however. The podcast was brought to you by Mac Weldon, by Donors Trust, and the Jordan Harbinger Show. Support them for supporting us. And you can also listen to the best of Ricochet. There's no way you can possibly catch everything on the Ricochet Audio Network. So check your local listings to see whether or not the best of Ricochet airs on a station near you. And yours truly hosts it, in as much as there's hosting to do. I just get in and out of the clips, and it's a lot of fun. You can catch up on what our guys are doing. If you could go over to Apple's podcast thing, leave us some 5-star reviews. I would prefer that you are honest about it, but if you want to set up your own little farm like they have in China with 50 iPods being touched by mechanical hands to give us 5 stars, I'm all about that. No, I'm kidding. I want you to truly tell everybody how much you love it, so more people discover the show, more people discover Ricochet, and on we go. And that'll do it. Usually at this point, I have a final question for everybody, but I lied. I don't, because we're over budget, we're over time. And as much as, John, you would love to go on and on and on about the mysteries and the wonders of the world outside of the law, which in his case consist entirely of rapturous odes to the McRib, we'll stop right now. Thank John for his service. Thank Rob, of course, as ever. And say, as we always do, we'll see everybody in the comments at Ricochet 4.0 next week.
Next week, fellas.
Not for me.
Not for you. No, not after today. Good Lord.
Out of here. Get the hook.